All right. So John and I chatted about an hour ago, and I said, "Hey, it looks like I could join. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to, and would you like me to show some photos from my travels in Europe of cool ships and stuff like that?" And John basically said, "Yeah, that would be great." He's like, "I was hoping you might be able to do that." Um, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to do kind of a little intro to how cool ships and open fermentation is being used in Europe, how it was done historically. This presentation is not one of my normal good Ron presentations because I threw it together in the last hour or so, but it does have a lot of photos. So, Dana, do I have share capabilities?
Let me.
Yeah, looks like I do.
Okay. I'm recording
Right,
this
cool.
as well.
So can everyone see the screen there? Someone give me a nod. Eric Weeds, I can see you. Okay, cool. All right, so here's my hastily put together presentation just to show some pictures and things of what cool ships are, what spontaneous inoculation is, and how that compares to open fermentation using these vessels. So open fermentation versus cool ships. Here is a historic example. This is at Pilsner Quell. This is a historic example of open fermentation. Fermentation was traditionally done open, going way back, obviously, in brewing, just because you didn't necessarily have closed vessels. You have steel vessels. So this is in the cellars of Pilsner Quell. This is how they used to do things. This is how they still do it for the beer that they serve down in the cellar, and in a few other select places. They call it their control beer, but it's better than the beer they make up top. So it's really not much of a control beer, but they give that marketing spiel. Here's an example of open fermentation still being used today. You see a lot of small breweries all around Germany that have this type of open fermentation, big vessels, small vessels. I've seen a lot of them that are kind of this size right here. This is at a brewery called Reichenbrand, or Reichenbrand. They have a whole line of their own beers, plus they contract brew the Rittergut's Goza. That's Thilo Janeken standing there from Rittergut's. Did a tour of this place with him. So this is just an example of open fermentation still in use. Here's another example of open fermentation still in use. This is at Schneiderweiss, and this is very large, shallow fermenters that are still used in this way for the Hefeweizens in Germany. Just about everyone still uses open fermentation for those. Reduces pressure and on the yeast, and there's various reasons why they do this, but they like to ferment open in these large shallow vessels for that. Quite the operation here at Schneiderweiss. This is a pretty massive room with maybe a dozen or more of these very large fermenters. One of the reasons why they like to ferment, I don't have the picture in here, but when you open ferment, you can have the slide off to the side. There's not one showing here. Actually, if you look back here in the back, you can see a slide back here, and that's where they can skim off the brown stuff, some of that sort of bad tasting, yucky stuff that develops on top of the krausen. You can scrape that off and shoot it down the slide, and it won't fall back into the beer. Obviously, if you're in a closed vessel, you can't control that, and all of that is going to fall back into the beer. So it's just one of those uses here. This is an example of open fermentation still in use today. It's not like you see this in a lot of places, open fermentation, but a lot of the little breweries in Germany still do it. And obviously they do it for the special beer at Pilsner and Quell. Here, this is Leafman's. And at Leafman's, they do open fermentation because they were bought by Duel Mortgat. They started making the Leafman's Ode Bruins off-site, and they just weren't getting the right character. They had always been open fermented here, and there's just a touch of a little special something that they weren't getting when they tried to ferment it in stainless steel closed vessels. So even though it's brewed, the wort's prepared off-site, and this is about the only thing they do in the old brew house, they do bring it back here and open ferment it in these very large vessels. To give you an idea of how big these are, there's a person standing there, so you can see these are pretty large open fermenters, and you could also see the slide here as it gets up too high. It kind of overflows into the spillway right here.
I have a question. You want me to save it?
No, go ahead. Is it about this?
Yeah, well, it's about what is the yucky stuff that floats on top of the foam and why is it yucky?
What's the term for that, Andy? We had to talk about that recently. It's like the brown krausen.
Brown Hefe.
Yeah. If you've ever tasted that, it's very bitter, and
It has Hefe in the name. I don't make Hefes, but
well, Hefe's
Hefe
yeast.
is just yeast.
Yeah, Hefe's yeast.
I'm thinking Hefe. Yeah, I'm thinking
brown yeast.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that little brown, part, actually next picture right there. There we go. That dark stuff that forms up on top of the yeast, up on top of the krausen like that, is it doesn't taste very good, and it's got a very bitter, acrid kind of character to it. And if you can keep it out of your beer for delicate beers like Hefeweizens, that's what they prefer to do.
Do they rake that off or whatever, push it off?
Here, this is not a Hefeweizen. This is for an Ode Bruin. Here, it's just a spillway. So as the fermenter just gets to a certain point, it just sort of naturally comes off. They didn't mention that they rake it. So I don't know if they rake this one or not. I didn't get the impression that they did.
Hey, Ron, I stepped away. Where is this?
This is at Leafman's. This is the Ode Bruin and Gudenbond that they make at Leafman's. So this is open fermentation that they do there.
Thank you.
Ron, I noticed in the Pilsner Kell, those the barrel, open fermentation barrels, that they were kind of cut on the bias on the top. Is that the similar? Are they spilling off that krausen layer?
No, they were tilted, so that you can see them. Is that what you were talking about?
Must have been then. Yes.
Yeah, back here. Yeah, those are just tilted.
Okay.
Here you can see it better because in front of the gal there who's pointing up, there's sort of a walkway where where you stand when you do the tour. And if they weren't tilted a little bit, you wouldn't be able to see in there. So I think they're just tilted to be able to look inside.
And they say that?
They
That's
did
the
not
reason?
tell me that, but
Oh, okay.
I don't know any other reason why they would be tilted.
Well, I mean, that tilt does allow that, if the Hefe could over top and then go into that, isn't that a great that she's...
It is possible. I've never asked that question. I suppose they could. You could even rake off of it, I suppose.
Yeah, that was what I thought. If it was kind of cut on the bias like that, then the corrosion layer would spill off as it raised
Right.
up.
Yeah, I agree.
Great question. Next time I'm there, or that I can talk to one of my friends who works there. I'll try to find an answer to that, and I'll let you know.
It doesn't look like it's spilled over, though. You can look at the writing on the side of the barrel. It looks pretty clean.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. It doesn't look like it's spilled over on a regular basis, but it's a good question, though. Okay, so that's open fermentation. Not done very often, other than Hefeweizens, which they do for their specific reasons. Other than that, small breweries like the one that I showed, where Rittergutes is made, they do open fermentation, and the small breweries continue to do that just because it's the way they've always done it, and it works, and it would be a major investment to switch, and many of them don't have the space or money to do that. So that's, I think, pretty much the only other reason why it's done. Here, this is a unique situation at Leafman's that they're doing it because they just couldn't get the right character out of the Ode Bruin. So they took it back and just continued fermenting it the way it had always been done. So that's open fermentation. And that should not be confused with Coolships, but a lot of times people do confuse them with Coolships because if you look at this, you go, oh, well, that's a big copper pan, and that's kind of what Coolships look like. So then people think, well, that's one or the other, or you just do both in one. And that's really not the case. If you notice here, this is also at Leafman's. They don't use this anymore, but notice how shallow this is, right? This is gigantic. It's much bigger. It's much bigger than the fermentation vessel. And the fermentation vessel is much deeper, right? Whereas the Coolship, they're always very shallow. So this thing is a gigantic Coolship, and they got two of them sitting side by side. At the end down here, you see these big doors, and they're on a rack, and they could swing open. And we had that on both sides to get an airflow going across. So the Coolship is really a completely different vessel than fermentation vessels. So this, again, is at Leafman's. They don't use this anymore. They stopped using it some years ago, but they do use the old fermenters here. Often in conjunction with a Coolship, you would also have a drip chiller like this, also called a Baudelaire or something like that. These are these waterfall chillers where you would have cold water running through these copper pipes, and you would have the beer literally spilling over the outside of these pipes, right? And this is how you would chill it to the next level. So the Coolship could take it to a certain degree, and then you would do this to take it down to your fermentation temperature or your pitching temperature. And it seems like you see these in conjunction a lot with the Coolships. This is
Hey,
for...
Mike, just a comment. I would say that, everybody used those back in the day, or all Europeans used those. It's only like the breweries that have Coolships that are still using them because, they're sort of sticking with old methods of cooling.
Right. And it was very common. That's what I was getting to here was pretty much, you didn't have refrigeration, so you had to cool your wort somehow. And Coolship was the way to do it. This was from a presentation I did on Indiana, history of brewing in Indiana. And this is the home brewing company. That building is no longer there. This building right here is still there. That's where Indiana City Brewery is today. This was the bottling house. There's still a name on the side of the building that says bottling house. It's kind of, etched into the stone. So this was the home brewing company's bottling house here. They actually had tunnels down underneath that went from building to building. But if you look up here on top, you see this canopy. And the moment I was going through these old photos, and I've never seen anyone mention this, but I'm going through these old photos and I see this canopy up on top. And damned if it doesn't look just like this, which is something I've seen in Europe. And this is a rooftop Coolship. It was very common to have them up high like that, up on the roof. And this one is at Head Anchor in Belgium. Super cool as the town has grown up around it. There's a big church right here next to it, but obviously we're way up on top of the building here, but very similar to what you see right back here. So Coolships were used until you had refrigeration, and you could use the Coolship in different ways, in that if you were brewing in the 3 cold months of the year, which is what used to be the brewing season, basically sort of November, December, January, February-ish time frame, depending on where you were. If you were brewing during those months, you might be able to get your temperature all the way down with the Coolship, and do it safely, right? Because in the summertime you got too much bacteria, wild yeast, and other stuff floating around in the air. But in the wintertime, a lot of that stuff is knocked way down. So it's much safer to use your Coolship. If you are trying to brew in the summertime, though, is to extend your brewing season, then you would use the Coolship to drop the temperature a certain degree, and then you could go to the drip chiller and get your temperature further down, right? So this was the functional side of a Coolship. And here, there's a few places that still use Coolships for making non-sour beers, for just making regular beer. This is at Ufleku in Prague. And this is their Coolship and their room. Again, you can see how shallow it is. And you got the big open space above it. Here is Zum Erge in Dusseldorf, and this is their Coolship. That both of these are still in use, which is amazing. It's a couple of the only ones that I know of for making non-sour beer that are still in use. The brewmaster here at Zum Erge, he says, that's just the way that they've always done it. They don't want to mess with it. They feel like they get a certain type of evaporation during the Coolship period. They've got ketones and things that they feel are venting off during the Coolship rest. So they just continue to use it, and they brew with it all year round. Here you can see it's wet, and this is in July, and you can even see the windows open in July. So no brewing season, but they don't take the temperature all the way down. This is another picture. This is from another visit there when the cool ship was actually filled. I don't know how much I believe this story, but apparently a lot of the old cool ships, the ceilings were shaped like the bottom of a boat. And I've been told that that's where they got the name cool ship, is it looks like a ship flipped upside down, because many of them had this arched kind of ceiling because they were trying to funnel the steam off of it. This would be open up here. You would have your windows open down here, and that would create this draft pulling the steam off and pulling cool air in as the steam's shooting off. So take that one with a grain of salt, but I have been told that's why they're called cool ships. Okay, so that's kind of the historic and modern usage of cool ships. But today, with the few exceptions of a place like Zoom Erge and Uflecu, you just don't see too many cool ships still in operation. Obviously, you're risking contamination with this type of open vessel, not to mention oxidation and every freaking thing else. So you don't see these in use too much, with the exception of today. And today they're pretty much used for sours. So, and for sours, it's more than just letting the wort cool. It's also the point where the wort is being inoculated with wild yeast and bacteria and microflora. So this is Cantillon. I'll get to that one in a second, but I'll show you another one that I've seen. This is at Bone. This one's weird. These two windows, you can see the sign right there, the side of the building, and you see these two windows right here that have screens on them. These are the windows that they open up that go inside to their cool ship. So inside here are those windows, either, I guess it's these right here. So these two are the windows that they open up. It comes in, this is the cool ship. It's not copper. There's another picture of it, but it's still a nice shallow pan. And here's something interesting. These lambic producers, they need to maintain their tradition to maintain their flavor. So what they did was they have built a huge new building, but they built it around the old building. So what I just showed you, this part back here, right, this cool ship area, this is inside this building, this concrete block building. The cool ship is inside this, and they built the rest of the new brewery around it, as to not mess up their cool ship, the process, I guess. So pretty interesting, even though this is a story for another day. They don't use their cool ship very much at all. They have this weird process where they pull the wort out, they drop the temperature on it through a regular chiller. So it's not being chilled. It just goes into the cool ship to pick up the yeast. So it's only in the cool ship for like 4 to 5 hours, and it's already cooled when it goes in there. So little sketchy on the cool ship part there, but they are still doing a spontaneous inoculation. That's the important part, I guess. So here's Cantillon's cool ship, famous Cantillon lambic producers. This is up in the top floor of their building. Here you can see the steam rolling out of there. So the cool ship was just filled. Here's a good picture of it. You can see, again, shallow copper. You can see the louvers off to the side where they're opened up and the air comes in. In this case, instead of funneling it up through vents at the top, they create this weird Venturi effect where they actually pull the air through these vents across the cool ship, and then they pull it all the way down the building, and it exits on the other end of the attic. So that's pretty cool and a bit different. But the key is you got to have some airflow, right? If you don't have enough airflow coming across the cool ship, you're not going to pick up enough wild yeast to inoculate the wort. So the other
just one comment on that is, you know, the impression I get recently is they probably get more wild yeast and stuff from the rafters and such.
Yeah, that was my next comment.
Okay, yeah, rather than air, because you know, you probably mentioned this, but you know, lambic, it seems more desirable as you get into the season, and as you sort of activated all those microbes, that's the more desirable lambic and a ferment.
Yeah, well, that's what they say at Cantillon. What Tom's talking about is you've got these wooden rafters up here, and obviously after this room quickly fills. I've been in this room as it was being filled. It pretty quickly fills with steam. So all of this wood is saturated pretty quickly, and it starts developing its own, you know, life and organisms and such growing on it. And as that steam starts to condense back into a liquid, then it starts dripping back into the cool ship. And at Cantillon, they say that late season lambic is better than early season lambic because of this effect, that you've got more happening up on these wooden rafters and these beams that go across the cool ship, and the stuff that's dripping back down into it, that you've got more going on there. But and while that makes sense for them, and I've had this discussion with other people, this is not the case everywhere. While it appears to be a big deal for Cantillon, there were no wooden rafters at Bone, for instance, and their wort is going into the cool ship chilled already. So they're literally just picking up air.
So obviously Pierre Tolkien worked at Cantillon, but he had that same opinion. I mean, he said the desirable, what he always wants is the stuff that's a few brews in, and usually he gets
right,
you know, a batch early in the season, a batch late in the season, but it's a late season or the mid season that he really gets excited about. So
yeah, and there's other, so that's what they do at Cantillon, but that doesn't necessarily work everywhere. Like I said, Bone doesn't have that situation, and there's other lambic producers where the cool ship just sits on the roof and there's literally nothing above it.
That's interesting. I know Cantillon had a big tussle with the EU when they formed the European Union and started putting health codes through. They had to seek special dispensation to be able to continue this. With an unsanitary, you know, room, an unsanitary roof and whatever. So sort of interesting. It's good that they were able to get it figured out, regulatory wise.
So that's pretty much it. That's use of open fermentation, cool ships usage historically, and then cool ships used today as a device to get wild yeast for the wild beers. We'll see if this video plays. This was the filling. This was the first filling of Cantillon's cool ship. not last year, but the year before. This was the very first brew of the season. So this was the first wort hitting the Coolship of the 2019 season.
And your group was there for that?
I was there for that.
Oh, that's really
It was it's a long story, but I've become friends with some folks there, and I was there judging the Brussels Beer Challenge, and I was at a grand opening party with the crew the night before, and they said, "Hey, we're brewing tomorrow, first brew of the season," and I'm like, "I would love to be there," and Jean's like, "Well, come on by, it'll be fine," and so it was really fun. I've got a whole presentation I could do on that sometime. I've got lots of videos of the old, pulley system working, and the old historic mash tun and all that stuff. It's pretty cool stuff. Anyway, did that video work? Could you kind of see that?
Yep, it worked.
And then here, this is just kind of showing you how quickly the room fills with steam. It's just within minutes, it was getting to the point where you couldn't see, and but that Venturi effect was starting to form already, and it was starting to pull the steam to the other end of the building. Such a crazy, cool process. So anyway, one of the things that I know Tom heard this firsthand is they say lambic ferments in wood, and the Flanders style beers, well, wait, what is it? For the Flanders style beers, beer goes into wood, but for lambics, wort goes into wood. So that's the big thing here. We're not fermenting these anywhere else. We're not open fermenting. They're just in the Coolship overnight to pick up the wild yeast. Then they go into barrels, and it's in the barrels where they actually do the fermentation.
I still claim some of that classic Cantillon flavor today is from me when I was standing in the mash tun in 2001.
I'm sure. What, did you spit in it or pee in it?
I just like no, I didn't roll around.
No. Okay.
I snapped the picture and got out. So probably not, but I like to think that.
All right. So anyway, this part we don't really need to go over unless we want to come back to it later, but it's just kind of talking about the differences between.
Ron, aren't those barrels at Cantillon and these other lambic places, aren't they infected in essence?
Well, I used to think that, and I used to kind of preach that I thought they got more of the wild yeast and bacteria from the barrel than they actually got from the air. But Pierre Tilkin set me straight on that one. So if you're going to be set straight, that's the guy to be set straight by. And he said, no, absolutely. It's not in the barrel because he gets wort from the different producers. And he knows, it goes into totes instead of into barrels, and he gets it that day or the next day, and then he uses it to ferment, and he's used it in brand new barrels and stuff that didn't have anything in them. So he knows very well exactly what's being added by the Coolship, and he insists that it's not from the barrel. The barrels are cleaned and steamed. And sure, there might still be some old growth in them, but the vast majority of it truly is coming from the Coolship. And I was stunned to hear that. I thought it was more of a myth, but he has assured me that it indeed is the case.
And they're bare wood in the inside, or some sort of pitch lining or something like that?
They're wine barrels, so they were toasted at one time, but not charred. Not charred like bourbon barrels. Wine barrels typically are toasted a little bit. So these are they're using, completely ex wine barrels. But they clean them with super hot water and they steam them as well.
Yeah, I remember seeing, I think the whatever 3 or 4 times I've been there, they also have like that chain machine, which is like, to get the chunks out. So it's basically like a chain that they put in there and then rotate.
Yeah, and then the barrel
Around.
gets flipped all around.
And
yeah,
so I always was like, man, that's like, if that's the extent of the cleaning, that's amazing. But that, I think I've since heard that they also do hot water and
yeah,
whatever.
they do hot water and steam as well. So that's just kind of to loosen it up and get
Loosen
some
all
of
the
the big
chunks up,
stuff out.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll let you take it over from here, John. Hopefully, after we've seen sort of how it's done in the real world commercially. So then build on that and tell us how you.
Can I ask a couple questions before we in the transition?
Sure.
The one thing's human beings, when you're going through the coolship period, when you're getting the bacteria, introducing bacteria, do you want human beings out of there? I would hope.
Man,
They don't seem to worry about that.
I mean, human
Yeah,
beings
yeah,
have
yeah.
E. coli and those types of bacteria.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're talking about just sticking your hands in it or what have you. I don't think they're that worried about it. I mean, I don't think you're trying to do anything nasty or dirty with it by sticking your hands in it or anything. But what it picks up from the air is going to be much stronger, and it's going to overpower some minor human interaction, I guess.
I have another question. Maybe I came in late, so apologies if you've covered this. Before they fill the cool ship, do they pre-cool the wort at all? I mean, oxidation would be the concern.
No.
You see, it's
It's
basically
coming-
spraying in at whatever temperature it is. And we've always been
Yeah,
told
it's
that's a
coming. It's
no-no.
coming straight out of the boiler. Yeah, no pre-cooling at all. It's hot. The room turns into a steamy sauna very quickly.
Okay, I imagine someone would be slapping my wrist if I did that on a homebrew day.
Yeah.
We always worry about hot side aeration, and so much of this brewing, they don't seem to worry about that at all.
Well, I mean, these are lambics. Lambics break all the rules.
well, and keep in mind, I mean, it's, you're then in some cases in the non-sours running it across one of those chillers where the coolant or the cold water's on the inside and you're cascading down the waterfall. So I think sitting in the cool ship is probably the least of your oxygen concerns.
Yep.
Compared to Uriga and some of these places that it's a key element. I mean, you're also putting in copper, which is an oxidizing catalyst as well. But there's still some tasty beer. Can be made in all different ways.
Indeed. All right, John.
All right, well, I'm going to try and share my screen and put this power presentation up. Thanks for that. It's kind of what I was hoping for to kind of lead into it, because it's a good foundation for what I led off with. And I have some slides too that kind of reiterate. Let me see if I can figure this out. I am not really that.
Just click on share, and then you should have a dialog box. There you go.
Can everybody see a slide?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Does it take up the whole screen, or?
You got the slides on the side, so it's not quite full screen, but it's a pretty good picture.
Well, you go to presentation mode in PowerPoint.
And do you mind telling me how to do that?
Yeah, you don't have to do that. You can just drag the little images over.
How's that?
That's good.
I got it.
Okay.
Good.
All right. So
There's no sale on that ship. I just want to say.
yeah,
Somebody got to say it.
I took it down overnight. It still works though. I guarantee that. So this is a picture in front of my house. This was a couple of years ago. This Coolship, I don't know if anybody knows who Eddie Chimmy is. Works at I think it's Craft Road Beverages. He's had this event called Chimmy Palooza in the past. It's a big kind of a sour share get together, and he's big into lambics and American Coolship ales, as they're called now. And I saw him post and ask if anybody was interested in using it. I said I was. So he came over, and we basically ran the whole day. We did a traditional turbid mash, which I'll get into a little bit. And then we set it out in 15 gallons, and pretty surprised with the results. So just again, definition, historical application, the Coolship, it's the anglicized version of the Flemish Coolship. So everything, a lot of the information that I got with utilizing it was based off of a group called Milk the Funk, which I highly recommend if anybody's interested in wild mixed fermentation, spontaneous, sour funk. Look into their wiki. It is a wealth of research knowledge, professional experience. It's really great. And by and large, the Coolship is more or less it's a piece of equipment. And like Ron was saying, you can, in the past, they've used like Anchor Steam. They've used it. Let me see if I can go. This is a more modern version. There's a company called Glacier Tanks, and the schematic on the left shows just how complex it gets. So you can actually open ferment and put in fruit, spices, while also filtering, or you can increase the volume and do spontaneous fermentation with it. So it does have kind of a multiple utilities depending on what the brewer wants to do and what his desire is. So this is the more of the modern version of it. These are other examples, of course, professional. On the left side, there is Allagash Brewing. They were the first Coolship in 2007. Below them is Omer van der Ginst Coolship, which I believe they use Jacobins. And on the right, these top two are mine. The one on the right was actually gifted to me by some friends at work, somebody who welds. And the one on the left was the one I got from Eddie Chimmy. And we'll go into what difference the size makes. This, believe it or not, this was also a boil kettle. This was also on the Milk the Funk wiki, used as a Coolship. Now, of course, the traditional Coolships are seen as rectangular. There's rumor to have it that it's based off of the fashioning of old wooden ships. They used to be wood. It was the only way you could really cool large volumes of beer at that time. And then they improved with thermal conductivity with copper and stainless steel. That's why a lot of the modern ones you see have copper or stainless steel.
So John, you have to be the only modern human with 2 square Coolships in your possession.
I think so. And I'm looking for more. I might opt for a triangle at some point.
I mean, there's 7 billion people on this planet, but I would bet you're probably the only one.
Well, if there's another man, I'd like to meet him. Oops. So the function of funk or fiction. So a lot of, as we kind of get into what I was doing or what I'm doing or how I began, there's a lot of terminology that gets muddied when it comes to sour beers, funky beers. And again, Ron did a perfect explanation of the difference between the spontaneous fermentation and the open fermentation. A lot of times you see an open vessel and you think, well, this is a traditional spontaneous fermentation. And then these are the examples of some of the modern beers, like you said, Schneider. There's also a brewery in the Czech called Untitled Chapter that they do their lagers in a Coolship. Mixed fermentation, that's more of a general appellation for any combination of Saccharomyces, Brettanomyces, lactic acid bacteria, Pediococcus, or any other unconventional microbes. It's sometimes synonymous with wild beer. Not all wild beer is sour. If it has Brett, it's also classified as sour. Language is continually adapting with the clarity of the processes, the ingredients, and the microbes used. Most notably, American Coolship ales has been used in reference to processes used and utilized in Belgium that identify as lambics because it is a protected term. So there's a little bit about lambic, some of the highlights, the turbid mash, the utilization of the Coolship, specific barrel aging. It's native to the Piotan land, and it's protected by the European Union. BJCP guidelines, we do have the lambic and the fruit lambic, but we also have the American wild ale, which can get a little bit confusing as well. And when in doubt, just kind of ask for clarification with somebody, and you'll find that a lot of people, when they reference and say, well, this is a wild beer, they may actually mean a mixed fermentation beer, or they may mean a lambic. So it's always good to kind of get clarification at that point. There's Allagash has a Brett IPA, qualifies as a Brett beer under guidelines. So the old-fashioned way, the lambic is typically defined malted barley, unmalted wheat, aged hops, local microflora. It's also a combination of the processes and then conditions. The grist is typically 30 to 40% unmalted wheat, which is where a lot of the starches come from, and the turbid mash, which on the right side, this is a generalized account of Cantillon's turbid mash schedule. And there at the bottom, you can kind of see how milky the wort is. That's actually what I produced. That's a picture of mine from one of the turbid mashes that I did. The idea is that as you collect this starchy wort, you put it in a separate vessel and kettle, you heat it up, you denature the enzymes, so those complex carbohydrates will serve as sources of food and nutrients for those microbes during that long 1 to 3 year fermentation process. Oxygen also has a critical role. I know somebody mentioned concerns about oxygen. If you think about a barrel during this process as being this living entity of these organisms constantly feeding, oxygen does provide them at some level of nutrients to undergo those processes. So it's not quite as much a concern as, say, a more static beer like an IPA or German Pilsner or something like that. So some of the success factors that I've found just based on reading, and which have also I've found out by undergoing the process, these are some of the critical components to a successful inoculation and spontaneous fermentation. Probably the biggest one is the surface area to volume ratio. That can and will affect the cooling rate. And then the surface area will affect your inoculation rate. So other issues that are going to affect the cooling rate is that ambient temperature, which of course is part of the reason why it's only brewed during certain times of the year. The thermal conductivity of whatever your Coolship is, you know, whether it's copper, whether you're going to try and use a plastic vessel or a thermal vessel like a cooler or something like that, which I've heard some people use. It will determine the rate and concentration and survival of the microbes over a period of time. Ideal temperatures are typically overnight around 36 degrees Fahrenheit and get a lot lower. Sometimes they'll get as low as, I think I've heard, 10 degrees. And the cooling period usually takes anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. Any warmer or longer risks mold and some kind of unwanted profiles. You may get like an undesirable level or combination of microbes. And down here where it says on the inoculation surface area, so a 36 barrel Coolship, 10 by 10 by 1.5 feet is about 0.67 square feet per cubic foot. And then a 10-gallon Coolship, which is the square one that I have, is much higher. So you can see the difference in the surface area to volume, and that comes into play a little bit later. I'll show you some statistics that I took when I actually took this out, and I was curious myself. And then below here, you can actually see this is also from the Milk the Funk wiki. Again, great repository of technical information. This shows you the surface area, the volume, and how it compares from brewery to brewery.
That's freaking amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's a pretty amazing job, and it's definitely helped me refine and kind of hone the process and figure out what the hell I'm doing wrong, so to speak. Another thing is, you know, of course, you talked about the barrel consideration. Primary fermentation typically happens in the barrel. Aging and maturation is the big part of the process. So sanitization, you know, the sterilization that they attempt. There are some statistics on at what temperature Brett can survive, how deep it penetrates into wood. I think, I want to say it was 8 millimeter penetration into the inner surface of the wood, but they do use steam. So it's not completely, it's assumed that it's not completely sterile, but it's enough that it allows whatever is captured within that that initial cooling period to kind of take over. Also accounts for slow oxygen ingress. This is a 15-gallon barrel I have in my basement that I've actually started to wax. Again, because of the surface area to volume on this particular 15-gallon barrel. There's a little bit too much oxygen ingress. So what I have in here is kind of turned a little acetic. And it requires topping off as well, which I believe Cantillon, John Van Roy discovered that when they started to top off some of their barrels, it kind of toned down some of that acetic character that they had experienced.
So John, what do you use when you're not using a barrel, or what would one use if they're not using a barrel?
Yeah, so I typically start out, this is kind of a special case. It's almost used as a Solera at this point. It's more or less for blending purposes, which is another huge factor I'll get into later. I typically use glass carboys for primary fermentation, and I leave about maybe a gallon's worth of headspace. And then as that slows down, I'll transfer them to another glass carboy and try to fill them up to avoid any extra headspace. And then I'll use this kind of hookup for an airlock, just to make sure that I get as little to no oxygen ingress as possible, because it's really on a homebrew scale. It's very difficult to mimic that of the professional breweries and how they manage that oxygen ingress. So I just more or less try to avoid it as much as possible. When I started out, The first couple batches tasted pretty good until I forgot to check on the airlock. And then it just basically turned into salad dressing from that point on.
Yeah, that is my number one issue by far. I'm always, I don't know, I need a, alert on the calendar, somebody to remind me, wake me up at midnight, once a month to top off those airlocks. But man, I've made a lot of vinegar over the years.
This will definitely help kind of put your worries away.
So I got two things that I'm using. There's one company out there selling extra large airlocks that hold like 3 times the liquid. Those sort of help. And then there's silicone ones that just like burp. I've sort of had good luck with those too.
My experience, obviously, that when you're in vigorous fermentation, you've got nothing but positive pressure. I mean, the airlocks are just blowing out. The airflow is straight out of the vent. I'm thinking that the danger is when that slows down, correct?
Yeah, it's over the course of 2 or 3 years, you got to top those suckers up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can show you too one particular. I think there's a picture of a batch that I did that developed a pellicle, which I'll get into as well. What it is, why it forms, how it happened. But as far as the fermentation process in the barrel, it's essentially in stages. And there's a paper that I'll show on the next slide that I highly recommend everybody reading or looking into, that was conducted in 2012. And it basically did some PCR testing with some other specific microbial testing to determine the activity of specific species. And they found that within the first about 2 weeks, it's pretty much dominated by enterobacteria, which had some glucose consumption and some acetic acid production. And then right around 3 to 30 weeks was Saccharomyces had mostly ethanol production. Of course, there are other bacteria that coexist and compete. Some of the byproducts that they put off get consumed. There's a lot of biotransformation. Stage 3 is where the acidification through the lactic and acetic species occur. Pediococcus dominance, a little bit after 2 months, followed by lactobacillus. It's a very slow process. It's also dependent on your hopping rate, among other factors. And then, of course, the maturation, which is dominated by Brett from 4 to 8 months and can continue on for years. And so I don't know how easy this is to see, but this shows the yeast in category A. It shows the dominant yeasts, bacteria. And you can see how drastically it changes over the course of the year. It's a highly technical paper. It hurt to read, but you can still get something out of it. Aging and blending, this to me is where the art comes in. And this is to me probably what makes it so worthwhile. Very rarely do I think that a lambic producer will do a spontaneous fermentation. They'll put it in a barrel and it'll come out, and that one barrel is perfect and great. The blending process is used to kind of amplify, adjust, and diminish certain characteristics. I know Drie Fontenaine is famous for their blending. It can add complexity. It can also help you achieve specifically what you want. You're kind of at the whims of those microbes and how they outcompeted each other and who the survival of the fittest in the end. You may not appreciate what kind of came out of it. So it's always good to have an extra barrel. And blending doesn't stop with sours or wild ales or lambics or however you want to categorize or call this, but barrel-aged beers also benefit quite a bit from blending. I know Side Project's pretty famous for blending a lot of their barrel-aged beers, and they produce some really phenomenal high quality beers.
And is it all differing ages of the various lambics?
So you can get, technically you can get, well, I should say historically and technically you can get into, the goose. You can, if you're a home brewer, you can essentially blend whatever you like. You can blend your 1 year, your 2 year, and your 3 year. You can blend only your 3 years. Most of the things that I've blended have been a minimum of 1.5 years. And I think as high as like 2.5 years. Actually 3 years, because that barrel that I have is a little over 3 years now. And I've used that for some blending.
And that's just a raw barrel, or was it a wine barrel at one time, or what?
So it was a bourbon barrel, and it had been used about 3 or 4 times, for 3 times successfully for clean beers, barrel-aged stouts or whatnot. And then the 4th time I tried to do a clean, I noticed an infection. And so that's when I ended up filling it, trying to clean it, hot water, swell it up, try and get a little bit of oak out of it, because whatever I was going to put in was going to sit in there for a while. And then that's when I started filling it up as kind of a Solera with a lot of these American coolship ales.
I found it interesting that Ron was saying that Cantillon likes to do wine barrels.
Only wine barrels.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
I think that's all lambics, Martin. Everybody.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the whole industry. Is they everything was sort of on the cheap, and they pick up old wine barrels, and that's what they've always used forever.
Well,
yeah, and with the wine barrel, you've got fruit, right? So it's whatever you're picking up from a first fill barrel is just adding to the fruitiness of the end product. Whereas a spirit barrel would just be way too strong. You can use spirit barrels, but like John said, you gotta run 3 or 4 beers through there first, basically suck all of the intense oakiness and all of the spirit out of there to where it's a very neutral barrel at that point. Sun King here locally, they do the same thing. I mean, they've got their fresh spirit barrels on the cold side. And then once they've used them up and steam cleaned them and all that, and they've become neutral, then they go to the warm side for the sours and wilds.
And if you're a lambic producer, you're getting these barrels that have been used by the winemakers, for several seasons, right? Several vintages have gone in there, and they've aged them multiple years. So these things are, I mean, I don't know, but I would imagine 5 to 15 years old by the time they get them. And then they're blending, right? So they're not going to bottle something that's all out of these barrels they just received. They're going to blend that in with other years of lambic and other batches and ones that haven't been in a new barrel.
All of that is the art of this type of production. The blending, the barrels, every barrel, even just talking to Andrew Hood here at Sun King, who's their barrel program manager. He's like, man, you can get 2 barrels from the same distillery on the same day that were emptied the same exact time right next to each other, put the same exact beer in them, and they will behave differently. They'll create 2 different beers. Every barrel has a life of its own. And then just add to that the complexity when you're making multiple barrels, and the blending, the art of the blend is kind of everything to a lambic producer.
Yeah,
You got to remember that a lot of the lambic producers aren't brewers historically.
Yeah. They're just blenders.
Dokken for sort of like the modern day version, but historically there was a lot more blenders than brewers.
Yeah, with blending, I mean, not just obviously lambics and any barrel aged beer. We have blended our stout and porter, the stuff that we've done barrel aged, we blended all of those. And if you didn't, you wouldn't have what you want.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the considerations when you're doing a sour beer, you can still get off flavors and aromas. You can still turn out foul. The difficult part of it is, when are you tasting it? Why are you tasting it sometimes? Some of the batches that I've done, when I first started tasting them, just awful for the first 3 to 6 months. And I think I may have dumped 1 or 2 that I probably should have kept. You just set it, forget it. Don't touch it or give it a second thought. These are, they really require maturation. There are some conditions though. There are some off flavors that if you do detect them, most likely will not go away or dissipate. Isovaleric acid, which is kind of a foot, rancid cheese character. Brett can consume some, but if it's in a high enough quantity, it will remain in that beer. Butyric acid, I've done some kettle sours before. Fortunately, haven't had anything like that come up in any lambics. I find that sometimes excess oxygen can cause that. And then you have some of your more classic, acetone, acetic acid. Okay in small amounts with some of these, but by and large, it's undesirable. It's better to, I think, balance and round out that acidity and sourness. The lactic acid is preferable.
Hey, John, when do you know much about isovaleric as far as what are the conditions that produces it? I've never quite seen a great explanation for what produces isovaleric.
So I don't recall off the top of my head. I know some of these are byproducts of, I think isovaleric is from Clostridium, a certain bacteria species and there's 2 other species. I'm just trying to remember off of the article that I read, but I don't know if it's the concentration of those species that can cause that off flavor to be more pronounced. Or if it's a combination or an interaction of other microbes that can kind of exacerbate it and bring it out more. But to the best of my knowledge, it is produced by 3 different specific species.
I've tasted it in a lot of kettle sours. Not well done kettle sours, obviously. Butyric is much more identifiable. It really is that vomit-like character. Isovaleric, my rancid cheese is a great descriptor, but to me it's like stinky sweat socks.
Mhm.
I mean, foot. Yeah, I mean that's what it's talking about. It's just like smelling an old gym bag with really stinky old socks in there.
Mhm.
I always associate rancid with oxidation. I mean, just about anything that's rancid is usually oxidized. Would isovaleric suggest oxygen?
It's a different character. I mean, it's oils, right, that go rancid, and to me, that's a very discernible characteristic. But that's not what you get. I've never experienced that in beer. It's different than isovaleric.
And one of the other off flavors that I think is kind of borderline is the chlorophenolic flavors. There are some Brett species that can produce chlorophenols, but it's when it becomes that undesirable, pronounced smoky Band-Aid rubber character. That's when it's just, some people prefer that in some of these beers. I'm not one of them, but I think some chlorophenol are pleasant in low levels.
THP, going back to that one, I follow Milk the Funk, and I have for many years, and I know THP is a big discussion point these days, but I find it interesting that when they say mousy or oaty or something like that, to some people, it's like, well, that's sort of the flavor of lambic. And to others, it's like, oh no, it's different. It's a different type of mousy. You got any further insight on that?
So I went to a friend's house who does these style of beers, and he had one that he described as mousy and Cheerio, and I honestly didn't think much of it. I didn't think it was bad or undesirable. I do agree that I think it's a point of contention. I do believe it's secreted by bread. I think it's a byproduct of bread. But I think, again, it might be the level of THP that becomes the issue. If it's too pronounced, it might be off-putting and distracting and, uncharacteristic of appropriate complexity, but I've never really encountered it to the point where I found it offensive.
I mean,
Yeah, so is this the same kind of mousy as in cider? Because if it is, there's that really distinct test where you, you swish with a baking soda solution, if I remember correctly. And you'll it's extremely clear if there's whatever that mousy component is in a cider, it will jump out at you. But I think it's a baking soda. You just swish some around your mouth, spit it out, and then drink the beverage, and you will instantly know. I think it was at one of the BJCP things before a AHA conference where they did that, and there's no doubt in your mind. So anyway, I'm not sure if this is the same mousy.
Take some baking soda and then spit it out, and please repeat that. I'm curious.
Yeah, you have to look it up.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll be able to find that anywhere, but yeah, no, that's pretty much it. You just take a pinch of baking soda, put it in some water, stir it up, and you swish it around in your mouth and spit it out, and it changes the pH of your mouth. It increases the pH, so you get a more basic mouth, and that changes the way that you can perceive this mousiness, especially in ciders. But
I got a couple Google hits by Googling testing for mouse and the word cider, and you'll get several things.
But of course, if you have to do that to detect it,
well, I think it's more of an educational. What it can do is tell you if it's there, and then and then
some
you
judges
can
are really
learn
sensitive
if what you're perceiving is mouse or not mouse, because that'll make it obviously clear if it'll tell you if it's there or not there.
I think it's funny we're talking about Brett. So this horse blanket is mousy tasting.
That's only because you had mice in your horse area.
Probably so. Hey, John, I have maybe a newbie question. I've done kettle sours before, and I know I always pre-acidify down to 4.5 to try to avoid some of the bacteria that creates like the alsalvaric and butyric acids. Is that ever done in these types of spontaneous fermentation where you'd pre-acidify with like lactic acid, obviously not past the taste threshold, where you would condition the wort so that it has less risk of like bacterial infection, or is that something that's not done?
Well, that's actually something that I do. That's not something that's done in the professionally, as far as I know. But it is a great way. It kind of inhibits a lot of the negative enterobacter from outcompeting or causing issues if you're doing a kettle sour. And I always use it just as a precaution when I do the spontaneous fermentation or the cooling with the Coolships. But that's a good question.
Good advice. Thanks. I'll do that.
And here are a couple examples of pellicle that I've encountered. To me, pellicles, while enigmatic and beautiful, are probably a problem. They typically forms as a biofilm in response to oxygen presence. And the one on the left is, I believe it had some pronounced acetic acid, and it was in a plastic bucket. And it's one of the first spontaneous fermentations that I did, and I had no forethought. I think this may have been 3 or 4 months down the road, and I came back and this was all all I found, and I tasted it, and I ended up transferring it and kept it for a while, but it never really improved. That acetic character just got worse. For me, it's an undesirable omen that you may not be able to salvage what you have, or it may just be something that you can utilize for blending. And as you can see, the headspace on the right side. So how I really started out, there's something called bioprospecting. So I worked for those of you who don't know, I've been a emergency nurse for 10 years. Prior to that, I spent 6 years in a lab, 4 years in microbiology. And so we'd often get specimens and plate them. And I came across a couple websites that talked about kind of bioprospecting, yeast wrangling, whatever you want to call it. And it's very easy and simple to do. The bottom right here, what you essentially do is, well, I'll start back here at the top left. So these are just mason jars with some cheesecloth over them, some dry malt extract, and hopped at about 5 IBUs very lightly. And then I put these all over the yard, and this is the perfect time of year to do this in the spring. It's supposed to get down into the 30s for the rest of the week. If you have any areas around your house or neighborhood that you're curious about, fruit trees, flowering trees, really anywhere is a good place to do it. You just set it out, give it about a day or two, and then you bring it inside, lightly cap it. And on the far right, you can see that those ended up fermenting. So
that professor from IU said that oak trees, oak bark has a lot of natural yeasts that are good.
Yeah. I've also read something that a lot of ground cover, leaves, flowers are in a higher concentration of yeast than fruit, which I found kind of odd. But essentially, one of these, I don't know if you can read it, it says magnolia. The magnolia tree where I put the coolship out under, I just put one of those little jars out there. Give them about a week or two to ferment, and then once they kind of subside, you'll get all of that, all the yeast will flocculate to the bottom, all that trub. Then you take this potato agar, the picture on the bottom right, and you reconstitute it, put it in your Petri dish. I typically boil these Petri dishes. They're borosilicate, so they can kind of withstand the heat. Boil them to kind of sterilize them. Mix the potato agar, put it in there, cover it, let it cool, set it in the fridge, take it out once it warms, and then I will take that inoculation loop and I will place it at the bottom of these jars, and then I will streak them on the plates and then set them aside for about another week. And then you'll see, you may be wondering, well, how do you know what's yeast and what's bacteria, what's good and what's not? Well, you don't. One of the ways you can tell is just by smelling your original, your jar. Another way is you can look at the morphology of them. And they tend to be, the forms of yeast are typically circular, and they're usually around convex or pulvinate. Sometimes they can be umbinate, but they're never, at least in my experience, you want to avoid anything undulate, lobate, erose, or filamentous. Those are bad juju. and you take one colony and you can just basically start ramping up all over again, and then you prospect. I think there was one of our events that I brought a beer that I actually cultured. I don't know if Tom tried it or Andrew or somebody, but it had a kind of a tropical flavor, tropical fruit, pineapple, and it was from my magnolia tree, and it was just some random yeast that I cultured.
I think I tried that.
Did you?
Was that out of Braumeister?
No, it was, I'm trying to think.
That's something else that you brought to the Braumeister judging when you and I did it a while back?
No, that was, I think that was one of the spontaneous fermented peach beers.
That's really good.
Yeah, I think I got a picture of it in the carboy here. So John, you're talking about trying to identify a good yeast, and then from a different area of your yard, and then building that up, and then just pitching with that. Why I as you were talking through this, I was thinking, you've set these jars all around the yard. You see which ones ferment. I was thinking, why not just taste all of them, and the one that tastes good, that's where the Coolship goes. You can do that as well. But this was early on before I even got into the Coolship. I just kind of,
see.
This is how I kind of started out getting to the Coolship and feeling a little bit more comfortable. And you're right, a lot of the more beneficial and preferable and desirable yeast that I got tended to be from this magnolia tree. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I started to make the decision to place it underneath there. But I also kind of wanted to isolate, only because even though I've hopped and I pre-acidified that wort as well, brought it down to about 4.5 pH, which kind of ensured that it probably is going to be okay to drink. I was still a little, hesitant to just quaff it. But I do have some of these jars left over in the basement, and I pull them out and they just smell amazing. I mean, they smell wonderful. No signs of mold on them. No real pellicles on them. I mean, it just looks like beer.
So going back to the pellicle, I thought a pellicle was a good and expected thing, and you're saying you don't necessarily want a pellicle. I know, Tom, you've made some beers like this too. What are thoughts on that? I thought a pellicle was a good thing.
I did too. Maybe that's why my beers aren't as good as John's.
Well, the only reason why I tend to avoid, or I consider pellicles negatively, is because of the beers that I have had, that I have made, or that I've had made from other people. It's usually a reaction to oxygen, and it's a biofilm that protects a lot of these species from oxygen stress. And if that's already occurring, then depending on how long that pellicle has been there, it probably means that your beer itself is going to get acidic if it isn't already, and other issues can arise. So it's probably more of a function of how long the pellicle's been there. I know some people find it desirable, but for me, my experience is no.
Okay.
Something like a Flanders Red, you're looking for some of that acidic. I mean, I've done a Flanders Red and I got the pellicle, and it seemed to be doing what I thought it was supposed to be doing, and seemed to work. The first one worked pretty well. The second one wasn't quite as good, but the temperature control was, I don't think I kept it as warm through its life. It was down, that one was in a basement where it was cooler a lot of the time. But in a Flanders Red, you're looking for some of that acidic character. I mean, I've gotten some pellicle on Brett beer as well, but don't tend to keep that one going as long, aging as long as the Flanders.
So I think there's a couple of useful comments I could make, which is a lot of times when you isolate yeast from the wild, it'll have that like pineapple-y flavor. So that's not uncommon. I'd say that's like kind of the vast majority of what you'll find. It'll also be cloudy and it won't want to settle out. And it'll tend to not be very attenuative. It won't have a lot of alcohol. And the second thing is when it comes to like acetic vinegar kind of quality, a lot of that can be produced by acetobacter, which feeds on oxygen and ethanol. So it'll convert the ethanol to acetic acid. So with a pellicle, that tends to suggest you're getting the oxygen, and then it's going to convert the ethanol to acetic acid.
Ah.
That's
Something like the Flanders, I understood that having a little bit of oxygen getting into the aging process was not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you, Lee. You want it in a Flanders. It just depends on what you're trying to make.
Yeah, Flanders can have that acetic character, but lambics should not.
Right.
But you also see it sometimes, right? In some of the commercial ones.
Some of the shitty ones.
I would argue you want a tiny amount in a Flanders. Tiny. See,
very tiny.
Sometimes you get that, all the old beer from Rodenbach, the whatever.
Well, the Grand Cru has more than...
There can be a heck of a lot of acetic in those sometimes.
Right.
I think in modern, like in the last...
No. We were saying Flanders have acetic, and the longer it's in wood and the higher percentage that's in the wood, the more acetic it's going to be. Lambics should not have acetic.
Yeah, but even Flanders, there is a limit to the amount of acetic you want.
I don't know. You're all wrong, Andrew.
This is from judging homebrew competitions. I don't want people going trying to get more acetic in their Flanders.
There's a lot in the Fooder beer of Rodenbach.
Man,
Yeah,
think back to the last time you judged homebrew Flanders.
Yeah, you're sort of right, Andrew. But the other thing is like you sort of have to try to get it, or in my case, I have plenty of acetic beer, so I can blend in as much acetic as I want. But a little goes a long way too. So that's,
So I Google ethanol to acetic acid, and the first thing comes up is chemistry of a hangover.
Yeah, acetic acid in your body is what causes a hangover.
Acetaldehyde.
Acetaldehyde, I mean.
Yeah,
sorry.
I was going to say,
I was like acetic acid, like you're messing up my fish and chip, plan here, whatever.
Yeah, definitely acetaldehyde.
All right, John.
All right. I should also mention, I think, was it Ed? Did you mention the isolation of the yeast? Were you the one that about the attenuation, or because that is an issue with doing this process, is attenuation, and that's another way that I gauge what's successful and what's not. So usually, if it doesn't attenuate enough, I don't bother with it or use it or utilize it. But if it's something that's does well, then it's something that I keep around. But that's probably, I would say, a little over 50% to what you were speaking to and describing is what my experience has been.
Yeah, it all sounds very familiar to me. I wish I also got into more culturing. But I really like the idea of Coolship and increasing the inoculation rate using like a fan or anything like that. Have you tried putting a fan over one of your Coolships, since, we talk about the Ventruvi effect and increasing the airflow rate? And from what I read, it seems like it has a really big impact on the number of microorganisms you put in at the beginning, because that can also change what dominates later. So I was wondering if you experimented with how you introduce the air to your Coolship.
So that's a great question. I will hopefully there's a video that works on this slideshow where I can show you exactly how the convection and the air currents work in a closed environment. The Coolship itself that's in the front yard, it's outside, so it's really at the whims of the weather at that point. But yes, I have considered trying to adjust the airflow, but I haven't done it. So it's a good question. So this is one of the early batches that I did, or more recent batches last year. This is back in March. This is again in front of the house. You can barely see maybe some of the leaves blooming on that tree. 36 degrees overnight. It was a 15-gallon batch, 60% pills, 40% wheat. It was a turbid mash. I estimated IBUs to be around 10. I do have a brown paper bag in my attic full of old Cascade hops. And I have separate bags, and I just kind of pull from that. To be honest, I do not calculate the degradation of the alpha acids. I make an approximation of like 75% of what the original alpha acid was of that Cascade, and then I'll hop it to that 10 IBUs accordingly. And then I think somebody mentioned earlier, do you acidify? I do. Again, it's a precaution thing. Is it necessary? I can't say. Cooling for this in the front yard at this overnight, it took around 10 hours. I probably left it out maybe an hour or a little more than I should have. But then I transferred to glass carboys. And one of the things that I do for insurance purposes, because this can get expensive, one was completely unadulterated and spontaneous, and I set that aside. One, I used dregs from a previous batch that I did, and then one, I just used a commercial Rosalaire blend. So that gives me a little bit of variety. It also kind of gives me at least 2/3 chance of success. And then that spontaneous, if it happens to work out, is all gravy. This isn't really a great picture, but I don't know if you can see there are little droplets on, this is in my garage. I did one batch in my garage and opened the window, and I think there's a video with convection, but you can see those little droplets when you talk about condensation dropping back into the wort. This is kind of a good example and a witnessed experience on my part of seeing that chance, those microbes falling into that wort and inoculating it in real time. I actually went and kind of felt the rafters in the garage just to see if there was any accumulation or any wet beams or anything like that. And I couldn't really appreciate anything like that. So, but the whole garage was just peppered with these little beads of condensation on the ground. So this was a video. I don't know if, okay, so this was after, let's see, how do I get this to play? No. Is it not playing? Yeah. Oh, here we go. It's going to pull up the link.
That's because you got a Mac.
Touche. It's 10 years old too.
Well done. Well done.
So this was 3 days after that that open or that spontaneous fermentation. I may have had a few drinks. The one on the left was all spontaneous. This one I think has dregs. Yep. And that's going along. These can sometimes take a week or a little more till you see signs of fermentation. One of the first times I did it, I was pretty concerned, and I thought the batch was scrapped. I took a sample to test the gravity, and as I pulled the the thief out, there was a very long strand of exopolysaccharides, which is basically, it looks like snot, and it's typically formed by Pediococcus. Some people call it sick or ropiness. Again, I called Eddie and I said, I don't know what happened, but I think I'm going to have to pitch this. And he said, hold on, let me talk to somebody. And I guess he called somebody in Belgium, and they were like, leave it alone. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, I came back and it smelled like ripe pineapples. It was gorgeous. Had a nice krausen forming. This is a video of this 2x5, 2.5 foot by 2.5 foot Coolship. And you can just kind of see as it rises. I tried to track some of the, I don't know how well I did, but I think it holds, this one holds, it says 10 gallons, but it's probably closer to 8.5. I think it'll pan over to the light maybe. And you can see how the steam kind of flows. And this is going on all night. However, the problem I had, which there's another slide where I took measurements of the cooling rate.
How'd you fill the one in your front yard? Did you have to take your brew kettle out to it? Fill it in place?
I carried 5 gallons at a time and dumped it in there. I would not advise that. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did take it out. Get back.
This is where you need interns.
Yeah, I would pay them well. So that Coolship, the slide didn't come out right. So it came out at 0 minutes. The temp was 214 degrees. It was 40 degrees outside. You can see in just an hour and a half, it dropped 100 degrees. And within 4 hours, it got right down to what would constitute the pitching and the barrel, or pitching, the barrel filling at that point. But I left it alone for another 4 hours. It dropped all the way down to 47. And that by that time, the temperature outside was 34 degrees. Needless to say, this was not a success. It was cold enough that I ended up putting a little bit of a heating blanket around it to try and rouse up. Absolutely nothing. There was no activity whatsoever for over a week and a half. And I ended up seeing some mold on the outside or on the rim in the carboy. So that entire batch was dumped and lost. So going back to the success factors for a good Coolship, I do have some materials which I might try to use to insulate that Coolship and try and slow down that that process. But I haven't had any issues with the other vessel that I have.
I have a question. I would suspect if it's 34 degrees outside, the microbes in the air may not be as active as like during the summer. Is that a fair statement, or am I mistaken?
No, that's a fair statement. The problem is that during the summer, there are too many, and there are too many undesirable ones. And that's typically why the season begins in the fall and lasts throughout the spring. And they'll do batches. The 34 degrees, 36 degrees is usually the most desirable. If it's not successful, it's probably due to any number of these other factors. I think that there are more variables in this process that are outside of brewers' control, like the weather, like where you're doing this, the microflora. But there are things that you can have control of, like the size of your vessel. But yeah, that's a good question. That's why they typically don't brew these style of beers during the summer for that reason, just because there's so much else that's out there floating in the air.
Would insulating the Coolship make any difference? I mean, when you're 34 degrees outside and your work temperatures are what they are, you've got so much evaporation going on. You've got evaporative cooling. I would insulation make any difference?
Most likely not. But at this point, for me, I'm willing to try it. But again, it goes back to the problem of your surface area to volume ratio. That surface area is so large, and that evaporation rate and that cooling rate is so quick that I'm not getting the kind of long cooling period for a decent inoculation. The other vessel, I didn't really have that much of an issue, although that was probably closer to 8 hours optimally to where I could put them in the barrels, or put them in the carboys and then the barrel. So on the right side, this is what my basement looks like. This is one side of the basement. And this is how I basically store them. They all have these airlocks that are leading in. They're all topped off at the very top of the bung. Sometimes what I will do is, if I do want to try or taste, I'll take a little sample and then I'll drop some either maltodextrin, lactose, sugar, or something in there to kind of re-ferment, produce some CO2 to kind of push it out. Push out whatever oxygen I reintroduced. Yes, Brett can consume maltodextrin and lactose. You can add it to your beer. It's not going to make it creamy or anything. Over time, it's just extra food for it to consume. It's another form of sugar. I think there are most styles of Brett that
look like peaches.
They are peaches, yes. This was the beer that I brought over to Ron's that we tried.
Oh, I wish I could.
Awesome.
Yeah, those were all frozen peaches.
Did you freeze them?
Yeah, they were, I think, 8 months old, frozen.
Yeah, they don't look like canned peaches. That's great.
Yeah. So yeah, these peaches sat on this for 2 months. And then I tried to filter out as best as I could, bottled it up, did a bottle condition. It came out a little overcarbed. Just probably didn't give it enough time to eat the sugars. But one of the considerations when adding fruit is I think it's the acidity and the tannins from the fruit skins that can kind of cause balance issues. So you really want to monitor your contact time with the fruit. This is the only fruit version that I've done so far. I'd like to do some cherries, raspberries, or blueberries in the future. And these are options if you're risk averse to trying spontaneous fermentation. These are just some examples of the microbes in the species that are typically dominant or can contribute those flavors that you find in the commercial examples. White yeast, white labs all have a version of Brett bruxellinus, and they all have different characteristics. So you can even mix and match what you like, what you prefer. When you talk about, do I want to pitch Brett, and then I want to pitch Saccharomyces, and then do I want to do lacto, or do I want to put lacto first? And I think that's more of a preference, but it also depends on what your underlying motive is, or what you want to get out, what your target profile is for the beer. But yeah. And overall, probably some of the most valuable lessons, patience. The beer takes a while to develop. This first 6 to 10 months, you're probably not going to like what you made. You're going to think you screwed up. You're probably liable to pitch it. Just set it, leave it alone for a year or two, come back to it and visit it. Risk tolerance, acceptance of failure. Batches can and will go bad. Not everything's perfect. Kind of knowing those mitigating factors like your pH adjustment, cold side oxidation, don't ferment in a bucket. Optimal weather, when is the weather going to be the best for you to do this? And then all of those vessel factors that I talked about, the surface area, the inoculation rate. You can start small and build up. So when I was talking about the bioprospecting, if you don't know how to pick yeast or you don't know how to do it, you can just get some bread yeast and kind of go through that process and plate some bread yeast and watch it grow on the agar. And then you can see what yeast colonies kind of look like in comparison to other molds or bacteria. Plan for a schedule and a chain of several batches. It's a good idea to do several of these at a time, or to do it maybe twice a year. So that way, not only do you have a catalog for blending, but you can also come back and see how these progress over a period of time, and it keeps you active rather than just getting restless and waiting an entire year to do this again. This is really something that you get benefits out of doing it more often out of the year, the same thing. I highly suggest learning blending. Blend anything and everything. Blend your liquor, blend orange juice and LaCroix. Tastes like Orangina to me. When I lived in France, I loved Orangina. It was the first time I ever had it playing ball out there. And I had an idea one time I was going to blend. You can do the same thing with fruit juices. You'll get to a point when you do these sour beers. Steve Kent and Jeremiah Tyson from Circle City, and I think Jeremy Raley was part of it as well. We did turbid mash, and then we pitched different yeasts and bacteria. And a year later, we came back and we did kind of a taste test, and we decided on blending certain batches, and we came up with, I think, a few pretty good ones that I think Steve is supposed to let us know when they're ready, and then we can add fruit additions. Another thing, learn your microbial contributions and what are each species' optimal conditions, what do they contribute, and then just kind of enjoy the mystery, the romance, and the adventure of brewing. So here's some online resources too. I just put this together. I'm more than happy to make this available to everybody or anybody who wants to look through it, read it. Highly recommend these resources if you're interested in getting into them. Michael Tonsmere, I've actually emailed before when I was starting out and asked him some questions, and he was more than kind and informative and kind of directing me and identifying some of the issues that I was having. Bootleg Biology, they actually will take samples from people all over the country, and they have a catalog where they identify where the yeast was captured, some of its characteristics. It's a yeast bank. They also have some commercial yeast available, and then if you're interested in bioprospecting, kind of how I described it, they have a much more detailed toolkit with instructions for you to do. And that's essentially it.
Are we gonna can we get a copy of this? Is it being recorded? I think Dana said she was recording it.
I believe it is. It'll be posted to YouTube. There's a YouTube channel for FBI, so you can have it there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's being recorded.
Cool.
And can the presentation be put up on the FBI site?
Yeah, definitely.
That would be great.
Yeah, the website or the YouTube site will have this up in a couple of days after John Swain has edited it and put it up there and made sure it was clean, okay?
Hi, Joe. Didn't see you there. Thank you. Thank you very much, John Allison. That was great.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I want to say thank you very much also. I mean, Ron and John especially. I learned so much tonight. Thank you
Yeah,
very
that
much.
was fantastic.
Yeah, very well done, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you. I'm going to go. Bye.
See you, Linda.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We're all dazed and confused, John.
Hey, thank you all for coming out tonight. And
Show of
Tom
hands.
on
Who's
vacation.
buying a cool ship?
Yeah. Did you see Tom Wallbank's cool ship in his profile?
I did see that. Is he actually on a cruise?
It's a cool ship.
I was waiting for someone. You know, I scour the internet. I find a picture of a cool ship, and
Yeah. I got it.
Nobody
and
got
I appreciate you pulling it out because I was going to have to say something otherwise.
Yeah.
Hey, if Tom's on a ship, it's automatically cool, right?
Amen.
Yeah, let me move out of the way. It is a cool ship. It's got like a volcano on it or something. It makes
Hey, wait do you see my cool camper in a couple weeks?
Oh, you got something coming.
Yeah.
I am excited about seeing that.
Yeah. I'm going out to California and pick it up, drive it home.
What'd you get?
Oh, I got that transit van, that conversion. Yeah.
What company's doing it?
Pop up. It's called Mod Vans.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does that compare with Sandy's?
Well, mine's
Way
got
better.
148-inch wheelbase, and it's got a pop. It's a low top Ford Transit model, 250. It's got a water heater and a furnace combo and all the, everything.
Look like to do it right on their website, looks like you have to put a surfboard on the top or it doesn't really count.
And what
cool ship.
Hey, I hope I see you all out on Saturday for the Volks March.
Volks March.
I'll be there.
Saturday.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'll send out some more details and the map and some stuff like that too, Dana.
Okay, that sounds good.
Hey,
We had
Ed,
a lot of fun last time, so please, everybody.
Yeah, I talked to Eddie at Half Liter just to make sure that they're cool with a group coming in and just having a beer and leaving, and we should be fine with that. I'll talk to Mullins as well at the brew pub.
Yeah.
I saw Half Liter advertise they're doing something with hot dogs at Liter House on Saturday. And of course they opened that new hot dog place in Fishers, I think, too, but this is unrelated, I think. I don't know.
Well, that's good. I like hot dogs.
Is the Leader House still open, or is it just the barbecue place now?
It hasn't been open for a long time. It will be open again. They're talking about it now, so it's probably in the works, but it's not open as of right now.
It's not going to be Leader House though.
Well, the hot dog thing is,
Yeah.
but I mean, they're attached. So.
Leader House, the German place, is no more.
Okay. That's a little bit. I mean, I like their barbecue, but it's a little bit of a shame because I like the way it was as well with the German kind of.
So I said it wrong. I said Leader House. Leader House was the front part, which was the German restaurant.
Yes.
That's dead.
Okay.
The one in the back is called
Half Liter.
Half Liter.
Yeah, and it's more of a barbecue.
Yeah. So the whole place now is Half Liter.
Wasn't Leader House part of Psalms or something like that?
Yeah, it still is. They were in the same building. That's why I said I talked to Eddie Somm to make sure that it was cool for us to come by and not have reservations. I wasn't sure what they're doing. COVID times, things are weird. They said we should be fine stopping in for a beer.
I have a pretty good relationship with Eddie Somm anytime. I mean, he's always cool about stuff.
Yeah, he's a good guy. All right. Well, hey, it's been a long day. I had a session. I started teaching beer at noon to a beer sommelier program out of Bamberg, Germany. So it's been a long day of Zooming for me. So I'm going to check out. But John, great job. That was really awesome stuff, and great to hear. So peace out.
Thank you both so much.
All right.
Yeah,
Good night.
thanks, y'all.
I will
everybody.
say, John, you're a maniac. I mean, this is so cool, and I mean, I love it. Very cool.
I just vote for next time we do something like this is the presenter has to get everybody have samples to pick up so we can try spontaneous fermented beers while we're listening.
Sure, we can arrange that.
Says the man with the homebrewed lambic. Is that what I'm reading?
Oh yeah, it's oregano. True though. Come by, get one. It's nicely acidic.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
All right. Good night, everybody.
All right.
Buenas cervezas for all.